Friends, over the years, you and I have learned a lot about the cars we have driven, and one thing that's been pretty consistent all the way through is that they're all a reflection of the people that develop them. Like, for example, the Cadillac CTS-V is bonkers because it's developed by a mad scientist, one whom we love. Well, today we're going to look at an equally bonkers car, but for a different reason and from a different mad scientist. Today we're going to find out why Yaguchi-san, well, he instills a bit of tradition in his brand of bonkers. Okay, so once again, we're at that point where you guys need to get out your notebook, your iPad, maybe even your Etch-a-Sketch, because we have a lot to cover here. Now, in the tech review, we did cover some stuff here about the Yaguchi-san engine that has been pilfered from the RCF, but let's build on that, and we'll start by recapping some of the numbers. So it's a 5-liter, 90-degree V8, aluminum block, aluminum heads, 467 horsepower, which comes in at a very aggressive 7,100 RPM. Just to kind of give you a basis of comparison, max engine speed, 7,300 RPM. Now the torque, 389 pound-feet of torque, which comes in also at a very aggressive 4,800 RPM, stays flat all the way up to 5,600 RPM. Now let's put that aside, and there's a couple of other things going on here. Now, we have spent a lot of time looking at big engines like this, big in relative terms in today's world, and you see guys like Dave Leone doing things like cylinder deactivation to improve overall fuel economy, even a car like this meant for performance. Well, Yaguchi-san kind of went in a different direction here, and that he's pilfered some technology from his hybrids. So normally when the car is under load, when like basically jackasses like you and I drive it, it's in normal auto cycle for performance. But instead of doing cylinder deactivation, he can switch the car over to Atkinson cycle, which we've seen in some cars recently, and that is basically a function of increasing the fuel economy. Now, another area where they try to increase the fuel economy, odd when we're talking about a 467 horsepower V8, is the transmission. It's an 8-speed automatic and it's a torque converter automatic. Now, they do have the paddle shifts and all that kind of stuff. Now, putting that all together, even with an engine that can switch its cycle from auto to Atkinson and back, the compression ratio is 12.3 to 1, incredibly high. So how does that translate to out here on the road? And now, for something completely different. No, it's not this declining radius off-camber turn. It is that we're on the road to Moto Canyon, not Moto Canyon itself. And we're shooting here now because we have to dispense with the boring mode. This car, like any other car in its segment, has like the different throttle mapping and transmission mapping, all that kind of stuff. So I figured we'd deal with eco mode here. And we know we're in eco mode because we've got this like blue thing that looks like a turbine that's been pilfered from like the gauge of a Prius. And you'd think it's a tachometer, but it's not because it's not really connected to the engine speed. But let's put aside that, put our foot into it, and see what we got in terms of pulling or pushing power. And you know, you put your foot into this thing, and you're like, yeah, this is definitely a powerful V8. But you're like, for some reason, it doesn't register with your brain the idea when you walked up to it, and that's because you are in eco mode. So we need to fix that, and to do that, we push down on this knob here, the gauge changes, and we are now in regular mode. And you do notice a pretty sizable difference going from eco to regular mode, and that's where you do feel the 467 horsepower, although it's still, you're like, not fast enough. And that's why we have the sport mode, as you will see here, Sport S mode. And you put your foot into this thing, and that's where I'd say it's not just the throttle mapping that's changing, it's the transmission mapping that's changing, because you get crisper shifts. All of a sudden, you put your foot into it, and it downshifts quicker. Now, there's something very odd about this. Usually when a transmission holds the gears longer, that's usually for more power, but in this case, when in the eco mode, it actually, I've noticed it holds the gears longer than you would think for economic operation. Kind of odd, but I guess that has something to do because I've spent now, a week driving this thing, and if I'm honest, fuel economy, not one of the strong suits of this thing. Now, in all reality, are we really here for eco, regular, or even the S mode? No, we're here for the Sport Plus mode, so let's switch to that, put our foot into it, and all of a sudden, That's when we get Yaguchi-san back. The man we love from the RCF. Yaguchi-san himself. Now, I love this man. He's like a Japanese Dave Leone to me, okay? And you guys know how much I love Dave Leone. And here's why. Yes, the throttle mapping changes, and you start really feeling, oh yeah, this car definitely has 467 horsepower. But really, is it the fastest thing out there? No, because it's down on the torque. We already talked about this. It's 369 pound-feet of torque. And you just look at the Cadillac, that thing, it's 200, almost 200 horsepower more, and same with the torque. So if you want the fastest, biggest, baddest thing out there, you got to get the Cadillac. But Yaguchi-san, he is like a religion, and here's why. Let's downshift, come around, and listen to this thing. Yes, it's piped into the car, but in the Sport Plus mode, I think you're really hearing the real thing. He said, when they were sitting around in the meeting, and I'm sure there was like the Prius guy in there, he's like, maybe you should consider the forced induction like everybody else is doing, and we improve our overall cafe. And Yaguchi-san just sat at the table and said, no, we're doing full on, full fat, full like Mexican Coke, V8, no forced induction, and the reason why is I want it to sound like, wait for it, this. Oh ho ho! Yaguchi-san returns! Now, when you and I unpack the driving dynamics of these vehicles, we generally look at a couple of different parameters. Things like any lightweighting technologies, if there are any, the mass that's connected to that, and then, of course, the suspension bits themselves. Now, let's start there in this case. So Yaguchi-san brings this right down to like the root level, and that means double wishbones up front, and maybe I'm the only one that thinks that's exciting, but people, double wishbones in the front of a Lexus. And then in the rear, it's a multi-link unit. Then from there, everything else is unique or specific to the GS F. That includes the dampers, the coils, the bushings, even the subframes. Then the brakes. Now that's where things get a little bit more interesting. The rear are 13.6-inch diameter rotors with 4 piston Brembo calipers. Then in the front, 15-inch diameter rotors and 6 piston Brembo calipers. But wait, there's more, and that's where we have to go back to that mass thing. So this is not an inconsequential vehicle. It's about 4,000, actually a little over 4,000 pounds in weight. Not the heaviest thing out there, but not the lightest thing out there. And that's a big function of the dimensions. So to kind of put it all together, the wheelbase, 112.2, and the overall length, 193.5. So now let's put everything we just discussed, and how does that translate to out on the road? Okay, so for driving dynamics, we got to go back to celery mode. Let's do that to eco. Come around a beautiful declining radius off-camber turn in eco, and there is lean. Shockingly, there is lean. Now, we talked about all the bits that go into this making a GS F. It's more than just paint and an F logo and fancy seats. So you really notice it. Let's just forget about regular mode and just go into sport mode. And let's go around a really nice declining radius turn, and we've got a nice elevation change. Put our foot into this thing, and we go, oh, Yaguchi-san, man, I love the sound of this thing. You buy this thing just for the sound. It's really what it all boils down to. If you really want to just save time and not watch the rest of this thing. But at the end of the day, all those bits we talked about, the bushings, the dampers, the coils, all that kind of stuff we talked about, you only notice them in sport, and I would argue, forget about sport, you just got to go to Sport Plus. And this is one of these interesting situations. I drive a lot of these cars that have all of these different settings, transmission, and all that kind of stuff, and in this case it also changes the sound, the acoustics. And usually around town, and oh, just guys, listen to that. Oh my God, this is why I love this man. Oh! But even with that, oh my God, that stunning Yaguchi-san soundtrack, I digress. And really, the point here is, I drive a lot of these things, whether it be like the smaller, like ATS, like M2 size cars, M3, M4 size cars, or the mid-size, the E and the CTS-V. they all are kind of the same equation, and they've got these adjustable mappings on everything, the dampers to the transmission to the engine, whatever the case may be. But remember back in math class where that annoying teacher first introduced you to the concept of the law of diminishing returns, and like, well, there is a point where you could have too many ice cream cones, and that like blew your mind. Like, no, there isn't a point where I could have too many ice cream cones. Well, believe it or not, like day 5 into having like a CTS-V commuting from my home to the studio, not crazy roads like this where I demonstrate driving dynamics, especially a lovely turn like this, guys, you do notice that law of diminishing returns where, you know what, maybe I am going to try in the individual setting like on the Audis or now the Mercedes, maybe I am going to go with the regular engine thing to get better fuel economy. Or maybe I'm going to dial back the suspension. Here, I'm now, I think, a week into this thing. I don't want to dial back the suspension. There is such a drastic difference in not just driving dynamics up on roads like this, but I mean everyday kind of roads where you're just kind of commuting. You're getting a regular GS in eco and regular, and maybe like somewhat sporting in the sport mode, but it's such a drastic difference in Sport Plus. That's where the concept that you roll up to this car before you open up the door, the concept you have in your brain of how this thing is going to drive is only in the Sport Plus mode. Now, if I were a betting man, I would say that there's a pretty sizable group of people hidden away somewhere in Munich that's completely focused on the marketing of Freude am Fahren, the ultimate driving machine, and it would stand to reason that somewhere in Japan there's an equally sized group that is focused on the relentless pursuit of perfection. So we need to spend some time on that relentless pursuit because it's changed in here. I know Lexus has been going back and forth between this. There was a trackpad, then a mouse, or it was a mouse, then a trackpad, now back to a mouse. And you guys know that I am not a huge fan of these unified controllers in any way, shape, or form. I much prefer the aviation-inspired theme on the Porsche interiors, well, the buttons. I would rather see that here, but what they did is they kind of paired this with a 12.3-inch screen, which is gargantuan. But, you know, this kind of falls under the heading of rich man's problems. I've been driving a lot of Audis as of late, and they have like the Google Maps in there. So looking at this thing, even though it's huge, it's kind of like ColecoVision compared to the Google Maps in the Audis. So TVD doesn't exactly sound above board, now does it? But it's actually something very exciting, and it's been pilfered from the RCF. So you and I recently just drove a car with an old school mechanical diff, and we were very excited about it. That is not the case here. But it's also not what we normally drive, which is like an E-diff, which is to say that the diff is a function of the brake on either side being actuated. What this is something very newfangled from Yaguchi-san. It's a diff that has a clutch pack in it. And effectively the clutch pack sends like power to either side depending on where the computer thinks it needs to go. And the computer uses a couple of different like input points. So it could be like throttle, yaw, lateral G's, acceleration, and actually it doesn't even need the driver's foot on the accelerator. I don't know how it figures that out, but I guess we gotta try it. But to make it even more complicated, there are 3 different settings that are completely separate from the adjustable dampers. So there's a standard, there's a slalom, and there's a track mode. So I think what we need to do is try this out. So rather than us putting our butt on the street, we should put our butt back in the car. Now, being completely honest, you really need to drive this thing on a racetrack to understand the difference. But we're gonna try it here. So we're in like the basic mode right now, the standard mode, and basically what the standard mode does is it's a normal differential. It does not really having any actuation of those clutches on either side. But let's switch with the TVD here, and we'll go to slalom mode. Now, if you speak to Yaguchi-san, he will tell you that when you go into the slalom mode, the logic is to make the long wheelbase car, like a GS, feel shorter. Now, I don't think you and I can push this thing fast enough on public roads to notice the difference. Yeah, I'm not going to tell you how fast I'm going right here, not ridiculously fast, and it is a little tighter turning. there's definitely a notice in the slalom mode. But then when you go up to track mode, I gotta be honest with you, the car is maybe a little bit more stable around a turn. Like, please don't try this at home. I'm gonna come around here pretty quick. And the car is definitely more stable coming around turns fast like that. But I would think you would wanna, like, I don't know how many people would buy an $86,000 Lexus and go on track days, but I think really that's what this thing is for, because it's amazing technology, because you don't see it anywhere else. Usually you see those brake actuation things that we talk about, and even now in that Mercedes-Benz SL63 we just drove, which the mechanical diff, that's old school, like back in the hot rod days kind of thing, and that worked well. This is just that wee bit sharper. So in summary, what do we got? Well, a position you and I really have never been in before. Here's a car that really is not the most competitive in its segment in a number of different ways. Like, for example, it's down on the torque, but also the driving dynamics are somewhat compromised because of the dimensions of the vehicle. So really, what is Yaguchi-san presenting to us here? Well, if you look at the entire segment, whether it's the Cadillac, the Mercedes, the BMW, or anything else you think it's in the segment, you basically have anything you want as long as it's forced induction. So what Yaguchi-san is presenting here is a choice. Think of it in a Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross kind of way, a unique selling proposition, where he's giving you something old world, quaint if you could call it, where you have an engine that makes power in an old world kind of way, but makes a sinister sound. So as you can imagine, I need to turn this around to you guys and leave you guys with a question. And the question is this: yes, not the most powerful out there. Yes, not the sharpest around corners, but it's from a time gone by, in a time you can't get anything else like it. So, given the choice, the GS F, the Cadillac, the BMW, the Mercedes, or anything else I'm forgetting here, what would you choose? And most importantly, why would you choose it? Let me know in the comments below, or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I want to leave you with two things. Number one, make sure you download our fancy new mobile application, which you could download for free from Apple iTunes and Google Play. And number two, a bit of a fun fact. So here we know Yaguchi-san for making ridiculously fast cars that make stupid amounts of noise and are very obnoxious, and we love that, and they have purple intake plenums. But what other car did this man really get his start in and made his name? Yes, the Supra we talked about in the tech review, but also the Toyota Crown.